She loves me, making tiny measured cries, as if slowly immersed in water that's too icy or too hot. Her fingers scrabble, unleashing dogs upon my park green back. Shredded and crushed, small leaves and petals fall. She loves me not. I am the limpid armored rock. She is the tide. The white foam streaming down her back, her shoulders. Sea and shore we clash together, fall asunder, clash together, fall. She loves me. There is a tiny junction where the worlds of plant and animal converge. I am the belt. Her muscles flow across me like a hero, of sleek and leaping ibex. She's howling like a zoo. She's screaming like a jungle fire. She loves me not. Her world and mine locked into a collision orbit, spinning faster, winding tighter, desperate for our final impact. Oh, sublime apocalypse, and oh, and oh, and oh, and oh, she loves me.
The Silver Age of comics are often credited as being a moment of crystallization for the comic book industry. As the strength of the Comics Code Authority weakened, writers were able to broaden the scope of superhero storytelling at Marvel and DC. And things started to get really interesting. Jack Kirby began going bananas with stuff like the New Gods, representing a whole new level of imagination and creativity with it. Alan Moore turned the Swamp Thing character into a famous and groundbreaking series billed and sold as sophisticated suspense. Though a huge focus of this era was on the power and merit of science, magic still remained a core part of both Marvel and DC, and that only increased as the transition into the Bronze Age in the 1970s began. Doctor Strange took hold here, and in doing so, was a fun, if unofficial, way of exploring some of the new ideas being explored in the wider culture that had been growing over the past couple of decades at this time.
Tune in with natural things. Take off your shoes. Get back in tune with God's harmony. Surround yourself with beauty and sacred objects.
The Doctor Strange comics in particular came to represent the sort of Timothy O'Leary style of counterculture that would come to be evocative of this particular era, especially in the late 1960s. Rather than being a part of the larger use of the hippie movement at the time, or this comic being inspired by LSD, it represents the broader change going on within this industry to be exploring and broaching new ideas and new forms of superheroes that really hadn't been seen before. To that end, Ghost Rider also presented a new world of comic book and superhero storytelling distinct from Doctor Strange. Though this character was more about riding motorcycles, having a flaming skull, and looking cool while doing so, he too not only represented the growing scope of magic and superheroes in general within Marvel and DC, but also a growing trend of moving away from the traditional character models of superheroes. So here we have a guy who made a literal deal with a demon, was a host to a demon himself, although maybe that was later retconned into it being a fallen angel, and was deeply ingrained in objects that symbolized the counterculture movement of that era. Yet he still fought for the side of good and was considered a valid superhero. This stuff was new to the world of Marvel and DC and the traditional superhero model. The older model of superheroes was so straightforward, even supposed antiheroes like Batman hardly deviated from the norms in any significant way. These characters were largely static, an unchanging role model meant to be the ideal of human spirit and ability, with little to no character development beyond that in between each issue. This wasn't true of pretty much any major character beyond the Silver Age. The static and redundant nature of Golden Age superheroes gave way to fluid models that changed character to character. This is how different archetypes came to be popular in major ways beyond the scope of simple Marvel and DC comics. And while this certainly included magical characters like Ghost Rider, it was perhaps most significantly expressed in the likes of Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Hulk, and in changes made to characters like Batman, who began to take on the more gothic and dark elements now famous to his character. Meanwhile, characters began operating more on a smaller scale with newer street-level heroes that were also a major trend of this particular era in comic book history. Perhaps most significantly, it was through characters like Iron Fist and Doctor Strange that Eastern philosophies and beliefs began bleeding into the pop culture of the West. These beliefs and attitudes heavily inspired and were very much tied to the New Age philosophies of the larger counterculture movement of this era, and also tied into the general sense and spirit of this era of comic books, with a broadening scope and scale we simply hadn't seen before. This wasn't happening exclusively to the world of comics, but rather ties into the history of American culture itself. The Western world was learning about and accepting more ideas and tenets of faith structures such as Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, largely with an emphasis towards beliefs of enlightenment through wisdom, the values of meditation and emotional well-being, conscious control over the body, and a shared role in society and the well-being of others. This obviously isn't true of all Americans. This movement wasn't universally accepted. In fact, it was reviled by a strong amount of the American population at the time. But the trend of the New Age movement was there, and it is undeniable. It's a lot to talk about, more than what can be covered in a small section of a much larger video, but you can see these ideas and attitudes really starting to take more of a root and with increased levels of attention in this era of comic book history. And most importantly, there's a sense of respect that emerges here, and the effect of all that bleeding into the comic book world in the 1960s, 70s, and beyond. So yes, for as much as characters like Danny Rand and Stephen Strange are very much making a journey into the East and learning the ways of a mysterious forgotten tribe or society, and it's all a bit of a cliche, a rather dated and reductive one at that, I do have a lot of affection for these early stories because at the very least, the writers and creators approached this subject matter with the idea that these people had a tremendous value to them. Danny Rand got his fantastic new powers because he proved himself to the people of Kunlun, who for all intents and purposes are largely treated like this really awesome and admirable group of people within the story itself. This trend would continue into the modern age, with ever improving levels of understanding and new ideas of philosophy trickling in over time. A good example of this in a more modern light within DC is how Taoism is explored in the new Superman comics. In it, eventually, Kenan Kong is not only given Kryptonian powers, but his abilities also become associated and imbued with the concepts of yin and yang. Each of his powers are now also tied to one of 8 Bagua, symbols in Tao cosmology, which connect and don't connect with each other in a way representing the dichotomous aspects of yin and yang. New Superman is able to explore these ideas in its series in a fun way that really comes from a strong sense of understanding the belief system, while also using it in a loose enough sense that it doesn't detract from the overall quality and fun of the story in question. It also presents an important aspect of character development and a common challenge to superheroes in general, the need to be psychologically balanced and emotionally stable to best and properly use one's powers. The idea, and magic is no exception to this, is that one must find inner peace, enlightenment, and wisdom in order to truly progress as a human being. This was all pretty new for the world of superheroes, Marvel, and DC, but now it is an essential element of pretty much any story told under their banner. It's why so many people look back on the Silver Age with affection, because it was so important in establishing stuff like this, and making superhero stories into something worth following at practically any age. As heroes were given more depth, they were able to explore their new psychology, and in doing so, the stories were quickly improved on because of it. It gave magic more depth and the opportunity for it to be involved in better conflicts and deeper, more meaningful stories. Then they ruined everything!